Hello everyone. Welcome to the AVPN webinar on reviving livelihoods post-COVID, leveraging innovative finance. I'm Kavita, Manager Knowledge and Member Engagement at the Asian Venture Philanthropy Network, AVPN. AVPN is a unique funders network committed to building a high-impact philanthropy and social investment community across Asia. Currently, we have over 600 plus members across 59 countries. AVPN is an industry platform to connect and share best practices, experiences, and knowledge within the network for the development of an impactful social investment community. As a part of AVPN members sharing their work and experience in mobilizing capital for impact, this session will include information about AVPN members' investee organizations, funds, and products. Information shared by the speakers in this session is provided by third parties and does not represent the views of AVPN on any matter. AVPN does not warrant the accuracy, completeness, or usefulness of this information and is not liable nor responsible for reliance anyone may place on such information. Delegates should consume this information at their own risk. AVPN reserves the right to edit, cut down, and adapt the content and material to align with the stated agenda or purpose of this session. Any information or materials provided here are only for information and knowledge sharing and does not in any way constitute tax, legal, financial, or investment advice, nor do they constitute offers, solicitations, or recommendations for any investment activity. On the panel today, we are pleased to have Geeta Goyal, Country Director, India, Michael and Susan Dell Foundation, Priyaka Nagpal Dhingra, Advisor Vision Entrepreneurs Livelihood Bond at Essilor International, Dr. Manish Kumar, MD and CEO, National Skill Development Corporation, Sushil Ramola, Founder and Chairman, Basics Academy for Building Lifelong Employability, Alkesh Wadhwani, Director, India Country Office, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and Pramod Bhasin, co-founder, Asha Impact, who will be joining us in a little while. We are also excited to have a guest speaker, Jasjeet Singh, Professor of Strategy and Sustainable Development at INSEAD. Before we proceed, a few housekeeping instructions. We will not take any questions during the discussion, but will open up the floor for Q&A after the discussion. Please feel free to use the console to type in your questions while the discussion is in progress, and we will raise the question to our speakers in the Q&A sessions. If you have further questions that are not answered by the end of the webinar, you can email them to us at india@avpn.asia. With great enthusiasm, I will now hand over the floor to Priyaka, who will moderate the session.
Thank you, Kavita, for the round of introductions. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our participants across the globe. And we are so pleased you could join us today. It is wonderful to be with our esteemed panel, and I look forward to great audience participation. As we all know, the global pandemic has affected billions of people across the world, resulting in not just a health crisis, but a political, economic, and social crisis of unprecedented proportions. In India, it has forced millions of daily wage earners to return to their villages, thereby stretching the frail livelihood sector. We are estimating more than 100 million plus job losses due to COVID. 30 million migrants return to their hometowns in India, and 1/3 out of these, roughly 10 million, are expected to remain and not return to cities. So how can we mitigate these lofty challenges through better skilling opportunities, which are made accessible and contextualized to the demand in communities, so that we also enable building of robust local economies alongside? India has a unique situation with 90% of its workforce in the informal sector, roughly 400 million people. So today's discussion, my friends, will shed light on practical solutions on combating these challenges from our veteran speakers in the space. We will hear how we can up the ante on collaborations between multiple stakeholders to create impactful interventions. We will hear about micro-entrepreneurship models that can reduce the pressure on creating new jobs. And Lastly, but not the least, our special focus on women empowerment through economic opportunities. And we will see how these models result in better societal development. We will round it up with coverage on innovative finance and how innovative finance can be leveraged to catalyze outcome orientation and more capital in the sector. So without further ado, I would like to start with Geeta. Welcome, Geeta. She is the country director of MSDF. MSDF has been providing career and job opportunities for low-income young adults, connecting disadvantaged youth with career counseling and skills training to them to help them pursue better jobs and better lives. So Geeta, given the foundation's strong learnings in this domain, which are the solutions that you would be focusing on in the post-COVID era?
Thanks, Priyanka. I guess a very relevant and a timely topic to discuss today. Before I get into, the interventions we will focus on, just a little bit on the foundation. As you said, this is Michael Dell's Family Foundation. In India, we have been focusing on livelihoods primarily for, from youth from urban low-income communities. And besides livelihoods, we look at education and financial inclusion. In fact, we see that as a strong continuum: education, livelihoods, and financial inclusion, to make a significant dent in the transformation of the economic life cycle. In livelihoods, I would say, yes, we've been working in this space now in India for more than 10 years. We've reached a scale today where of the 12 million workforce that is being added every year, we are able to impact at least 1 million each year with either access to jobs or enabling them towards better preparation for jobs. And I would say what has the COVID taught us, and what the last year has taught us, is significantly more important than what the last 9 years have taught us. I think it has exposed the extremely fragile nature of our workforce. Not that we were never not aware of the facts. I mean, the data was always there. We knew 90% of our workforce is informal. And we had started shifting our focus from the formal sector to more the informal sector and the livelihoods in that space. But I think with the significant job losses, just realizing that of the 128 million daily labor force that we have, 91 million lost their jobs in April, it became even more important to focus in on that segment, where I would say the exposure, the risk levels were much higher. And a significant part of that population in the informal sector is, I would say, either micro entrepreneurs, I mean about 65, 70 million of those, or these are contractual worker, informal workers hired by MSMEs, the micro and small medium enterprises. So for us, MSME is a significant focus area when we think about how do we enhance livelihoods. And I would say there are 3 key problems we are trying to solve there. One is just making hiring easier for MSMEs. Today they use agents, informal sources, back channels, etc. But with technology platforms, the ability to create more transparent portals that provide hyperlocal linkages on jobs is one area that we are focusing on. We've made an investment in a company called WorkX. Today they have more than 1 million candidates, more than 70,000 employers on the portal. And definitely post-COVID, we are seeing a lot of action on this front from different state governments. So I would say getting better jobs, more suitable jobs through better information is what the job portals are doing, and they're doing a reasonably strong job at it. So that's one area, just to make hiring easier and better matched for our target segment in the MSMEs. The second area on the MSME side is making them more visible and formalized without the onus of formalization. And really, when I say visible, again, getting them on platforms, whether it is the supply chain financing platforms like the Threads or the Open network that has recently been launched, or even market linkages like a Shopify or something. So MSMEs cannot make significant investments either in technology or in brand building or in advertising. How do we connect them digitally onto platforms which can, bear the heavy load of some of these common costs and actually pass on the benefits to MSMEs and just bring in more efficiency in the process. So I would say that's two, which is more visibility and more formalization without making it onerous. The third I would say is, and again, a significant piece of our research has shown that a lot of MSMEs are not really looking for very skilled or certified labor. I mean, that doesn't hold as much value as a trained labor, somebody who's worked before and who knows the job. I mean, I guess that's what they really demand. And therefore, the need and role for apprenticeships and internships becomes fairly significant. Again, the government is also trying to make a big push for it. But a lot of our schemes are such that a small enterprise cannot enroll, cannot provide the theoretical training, etc. How can we make it easier for MSMEs to become part of these apprenticeship programs, internship programs, and also hire from there? And a piece of work we've been doing in this space is in the state of Haryana, which has, I would say, in the last 2 years, 4x'd the number of apprentices they have been able to provide jobs for. So, so yes, I mean, on the MSME, three things. One is, making them more visible, making hiring easy, and the apprenticeship, internship window being available to them. Now, each of these three, I would say, have a very strong linkage with the industry. We cannot, keep the demand side completely out. And therefore, not just meeting the industry demand, but making sure that the industry also participates in funding some of this becomes important, which goes to the point around innovative financing. And I know Sushil will talk about the SLR model. So how do we create corporate partnerships so that we can engage MSMEs in, the last mile distribution or sales, and get the corporate to pay for it. The other is, how do we create impact board structures so that there are strong outcomes based financing and we get different pools of capital into each bucket. There again, we've been discussing a structure with NSDC. We've done a few impact bonds in education, now trying to replicate that in the skilling space. The third one I would say is a Revive platform, which was set up by Samhita, which is a CSR collaborative, where we are using philanthropic money and impact capital to really provide a revolving fund or a loan fund for MSMEs, gig workers, etc., who were affected by COVID. And I think there the structuring is important because it's not in the form of a grant. It's in the form of a loan, which could be used for skilling, sustenance, relocation back to the cities, etc. But these are easy loans compared to the high interest loans that is generally available. And because it combines philanthropic money, CSR money, sometimes even marketing dollars of companies, as well as impact capital, it is able to get it at a low price. I also see that my time is over, Kavita. So I will hand it back to Priyaka, but I do feel that the whole concept of engaging the industry in trying to be an equal partner in financing such initiatives is an important step forward.
I think those are fantastic, wise words. You've highlighted very crucial points around micro-entrepreneurship, apprenticeship, leveraging technology, and providing visibility through these platforms. And more importantly, the industry participation through innovative finance structures. Thanks so much, Geeta, there. I would now like to move on to Dr. Manish, who's the MD and CEO at National Skill Development Corporation, NSDC. NSDC was set up as a part of National Skill Mission to fulfill the growing need in India for skilled manpower. It is also a leading example of an effective public-private partnership model. So Dr. Manish, welcome. And if you could share insights on programs that NSDC would be focusing on to revive livelihoods, and more importantly, your experience and learnings from the collaborations.
Thank you very much, Priyanka. A little bit about NSDC by way of introduction. As Priyanka has already shared, we are a public-private partnership. 49% of us owned by the government, 51% by 10 chambers of commerce, private chambers of commerce. And we operate like a private body, but our objectives and our agenda is that of the government. The reason why I think the government decided to create jointly with the private sector such type of institution is because of the realization that while we work on skills, the actual market of skills is in the private sector. So the interconnection was quite critical. Over time, we have done a number of things. We are firstly like a developmental bank. We lend at low rate of interest to private sector partners to create institutions for skill development. And over the last 10 years, we have financed about 600 plus partners, and they have created about 11,000 centers spread across India. We have about 750 districts. Almost every district of India has one or two centers of NSDC. So that's the first part of our job. The second part has been to ensure that government financing on skill development, particularly grant financing, which actually flows on programs that is targeted towards skill development, goes in a smooth way, and we have devised the entire method through which it is delivered. So it's a kind of impact funding that occurs, and we also measure the impact that arises out of it. And thirdly, we also create standards that over time we have created almost 2,500 different standards in 37 different sectors, from gems and jewelry to aviation to tourism and hospitality, logistics and retail. So we work across sectors, and we work with what we call sector skill councils, which are led by eminent persons from the private sector. And therefore, it is connected both in terms of the teaching material that we produce, as well as the kind of people that we end up creating to the market at the back end of it. So that's broadly what we are. In terms of, I think, what we need to do under the current crisis, a bit of sharing about the nature of the problem that India has. Our workforce, if you look at it, 410 million, large percentage of it, as we know, is actually informal workforce, and that's how it's been for a long, long time. One of the challenge out here is when we try to see the nature of the labor force, and let's say we divide the labor force into four different income quartiles, we find that the lowest income quartile earns 26,000 rupee per month or less. The next income quartile, 37,000 rupee per month or less. So I think these are the two quartiles which are really, really affected by the migration that occurred because of the disruption of the economy. What we are doing essentially to ensure that we can cope up, or people could actually have opportunity to cope up with that situation, are multiple things. One is trying to promote online learning, digital learning, and that's something which has actually, as you would have noticed globally, has increased multifold. But second, we have focused on, as soon as the pandemic subsided a bit in different parts of the country and the economy opened, we have started a skill program that we call rural, which is basically rural oriented. It's called GKRY. We are targeting about 300,000 people. Our capacity is to reach up to 5 million people, by the way. That's what we reach every year. But we are starting small at the moment on this particular part, but we are going to scale up from January onwards. The initial effort is to focus on two things. One is short-term skilling for those who might have returned from wherever they were, and then wants to acquire a new skill and then get back to a new business, or wants to upskill themselves. So there is opportunity for them, and this is a grant-based program with the money being provided by the government and the training being delivered by private sector training partners. So this is going on in about 116 different districts in India. We have about 750 districts. Of that, 116 are the ones which are really affected, with a lot of migrant worker coming back to these particular districts. And therefore our focus has been on them. The second thing that we have done is creating match of demand and supply in jobs. India being a vast country with jobs coming up in different parts of the country, and the information about its availability not being there adequately, we have created an online platform which is called Ascene. It's an online platform, and it's so easy to get into that that even a person who is not very educated can actually, using just a few documents, enroll himself or herself. And then at the back end, we have private sector partners who are pushing in information about vacancies that arises in different sectors across India. And an AI-based platform that matches people in a way that the private sector is happy about the quality of people they get, whereas the person who gets a job gets something which is closer to their home, and therefore the likelihood of disruption is at least in his perception much lower. So creates more of confidence. That's what we feel. And that's something on which from 10th of July, when we started that platform till today, we have been able to give 900,000 jobs through that. And these are all offered by private sector partners, private sector companies that is registered out there. So this is one of the things that we are doing. Another thing which we want to take up is about impact bonds. And there was, Geeta has mentioned a bit about that. This is private sector partners coming in and actually funding our programs to take it to a new level, but more targeted towards impact and the outcome. We have noticed that when we do skilling, short-term skilling of about 3 months, and this is a randomized sample survey, in average, the person who got skilled compared to his cohort who did not get skilled, and both of them got jobs, when we compare the pay scale of these two people, there is a differential of 15%. So a certification that you get because of the skill program that is conducted by our partners results in a 15% increase in wage for that person in the very first year that he joins. Similarly, we have noticed that in case of recognition of prior learning, which is a huge issue in India, there is a 19% wage differential that occurs in the very first year. So therefore, a huge gain that we feel there is if we put money into this particular aspect of human development. And Michael and Susan Dell Foundation, British Asia Trust, HSBC, they have come together, McKinsey, they have come together to put in quite a bit of money in addition to what the government puts in is actually significantly high, and coming together to create that impact which is necessary at this stage. So we see a virtuous, positive approach from the private sector side also, and the need for scaling that is very, very high now. Finally, I think what we are also trying to do is to ensure that India has about 100 economic clusters, if you look at it. And each of these clusters, there would be about 9 or 10 economic activity, which is really high out there. So we're trying to ensure that our focus in each of these clusters is in those aspects of that district, which will create more employment there. And the PMKVY 3, which is being rolled out, is therefore going with that particular approach. So we are hopeful that in next year, we will be responding appropriately to the need of the people who migrated in a big number. Thank you so much. My time is up, I know.
Thank you, Dr. Manish. Thank you so much. There's just so much you've covered there. Fantastic pearls of wisdom. And what really struck a chord with me was the participation and partnership with corporates, with foundations such as MSDF, HSBC to really leverage outcome orientation, innovative finance, and really take forward the journey on getting more jobs and more entrepreneurships in the sector. So thank you so much on that. With that, I would like to move on to our next panelist, Alkesh, who's the Director, India Country Office at Gates Foundation. BMGF's goal has been to accelerate progress towards a more gender equitable world by addressing the barriers that keep women and girls from being fully active in their economies and societies. Evidence from dozens of emerging economies shows that when money flows into the hands of women, their lives and the lives of their families are much better. So Alkesh, if you can take us through the work that BMGF does with women's self-help groups and how that is truly moving the needle on the ground.
Thanks, Priyanka. So I'm actually going to talk about a government program, which is called the National Rural Livelihood Mission, which has set up about 8 million SHGs across the country. which would translate to about 80 million women in rural India. And it's not easy to get any livelihoods or jobs for women in rural India beyond the agriculture work they do. For a variety of reasons. One, you're far out without having access to value chains. The second, the way our society is, women are expected to do unpaid care work at home for the kids, for the parents, for the grandparents, etc. So there's no real way they can do any really 9-to-5 kind of job. So what do you do there? This program, the National Rural Livelihood Program, really helps these women get some modicum of support in terms of livelihoods. And our role is really to support them in different areas. While we think of livelihoods really finally as jobs, before that you need some sort of social net, some security net. Then perhaps beyond that, you can think, how do you get some livelihoods and can government support you in these livelihoods? And the third is, can you do the normal livelihoods, which we all think about in terms of working in the private sector? So starting with the first, which is some sort of social security net. Post-COVID, I'm going to give you just a couple of examples of what we work with the government to do. So in Bihar, for example, the government did realize, and food was critical during the months of April, May, June, when things were really bad. So Bihar government did realize that this is a challenge, and it would be good to get excluded households, excluded families, their PDS, the public distribution system, the ration cards. And very quickly, within literally 4 weeks, the SHG women were able to identify excluded households, 2.3 million excluded households in Bihar. This was deduplicated with different lists, and the government issued 1.3 million ration cards to 1.3 million households. Now, this might sound, what is a ration card to many of us, but perhaps it's the biggest entitlement anyone aspires to get in India if you're poor, because it gives you 20 to 30 kilos of cereals free a month for life. And normally, just to get a few ration cards, the process takes years. So this is something the SHG women can do because they are right in the forefront in every village. They aggregate into groups and they have the ability to reach every household in Bihar and in India. So this was one. The second is that we worked with the government of UP to link SHG women to the Narega scheme. Many of you may know the Narega scheme is really to give 100 days of livelihoods. And what that does again is get women the ability to create private assets to restart their livelihoods. So what that means is, for example, you do simple things. You get poultry sheds, you get goat sheds, you get fodder troughs for cattle, you can build small irrigation projects. So this, and the government I think the government did a great job in saying that's the one area where we are increasing our budgets. And therefore, that also helped women get back in track to be able to restart their livelihoods. There are other examples of entitlements, but I'll just stop here in terms of the entitlements. The next is that, again, remember, women in rural India, not easy. Can they get some support to start businesses? So the government looks at its own procurement systems to say what businesses can we help women start. And there again, maybe from UP, I'll give a few examples. One is on take-home rations. So what governments do is they give some food called take-home rations to pregnant women and lactating women because that's when they need it most. So they redeployed this making of this food to SHG women. And in 200 blocks of UP, which translates to 1/4 of UP, so a population base of about 50 million, SHG women were given the job of making these take-home rations, which would result across this women to a procurement of about $130 million a year. So this is one example of how we work with the government to help the SHG women start production in these kind of areas. Another example I'll give you is PDS shops. So again, in the government decided that there was a set of PDS shops that were being new ones that needed to be set up, and there were about 1,500 of them. So they said these will be given to SHG women. So in this way, you can, again, I'm not giving more examples, but the aim is to say women need support, especially in rural India. Can government's large procurement machinery be used for this? And these are some of the examples. The last example I'll perhaps give, which is on the government side, but it's on a different manner, is that we all agree that financing is critical to start businesses. The SHG program that the government does actually has a loan book right now of about 95,000 crores. So that would be about whatever, 13-14 billion dollars. The government has an interest subvention, so it's pretty cheap. They reduced the loan rate during COVID, and in some districts, in about 100 districts, the loan rate is now 4% a year in terms of the subvention that banks give to SHGs. So that allowed women to borrow money at lower rates to restart businesses. And equally importantly, you need access to be able to just do banking services, right? Withdraw money, deposit money, things like that. And you know, bank branches are far away. So what could be done to actually ensure that you get closer to the ground? And many of you may know for perhaps a decade now, there have been bank correspondents, which are there in villages. It's not easy for women, just given again the social norms, to access these bank correspondents. So the SHG program gives subsidies to women to start to become bank correspondents, or they're called bank sakhis. So we are supporting the UP government set up 58,000 bank sakhis and 58,000 give or take 60,000 gram panchayats of UP. So every gram panchayat of UP will have a SHG member who's a bank sakhi, who can facilitate transactions for cash and cash in, cash out. Same with Orissa, we are helping the SHG movement in Orissa do similar things. So, you take care of at least the financing side, which is again a critical bottleneck for any business in any small scale business. The last part I'll move to is really fine. Okay, so you've got some social net, you've got support from government programs. Can the women do something that is really value added to their current business? So again, you would know that apart from agriculture, what happens in rural India is handicrafts, arts, garments, food processing. These are the big ones. And our view, and I think many would agree, is that the biggest really is because everyone is in agriculture. Can you increase value chains in agriculture? Can you do a little more value added in agriculture than is being done currently? And what does that little more value addition mean? It means really simple things like grading, sorting, at best primary processing. So I'll give you just one example of how we helped in maize processing. I see it's time out, so I won't get into the example, but that's another area.
At least you can continue for 2 minutes. That's fine.
Okay, fine. So just the last example of maize processing. With these SHGs, you set up producer groups and FPOs, and 3 simple things help them increase their price they realize by 20%. So one is, the price you get for maize depends on the moisture content. And what the Arthiyas do is they just take a piece of maize, put it in their teeth, and depending on how much you can, break it, you determine the moisture content, and that doesn't really give you a great outcome. So we help these women acquire moisture meters, which are simple meters. It tells you the moisture content. That gives them great feedback to get the right moisture content and get the better prices for maize. Simple, just buying second weighing machines. Often they would get prices which were 5 to 10% less for the weight, but now with weighing machines, these FPOs and producer groups could get the right price. So this is what I mean, just doing simple things to increase prices so that their profit margins go up. So I'll pause there to say that it's a large platform, it's huge, you can really impact millions of women, and the goal of India, actually of the ministry, is over the next 5 to 7 years to see that 40 million livelihoods are created through this platform. Thank you.
Wow. Fantastic. Such an inspiring body of work empowering women. Thanks so much, Alkesh. I would now like to move on to Ramola ji. He is the founder and chairman of Be Able, which is a pioneering organization in the field of skill development and vocational training in the country, and is also the first training partner of NSDC. So Ramola ji, if you can shed some light on the current landscape in livelihoods in the post-COVID era, and also, if you could share some examples of impactful program that you have come across through your decades of experience in the sector.
Yeah, thank you, Priyanka. Just a couple of lines about Be Able. It was set up in 2009 co-promoted by me after a long innings in the corporate sector, to enhance livelihoods through skills for the less educated and less privileged. And in about 11 years since then, it has skilled about more than 300,000 people in about 20 states of the country. Now, coming back to your question, as you mentioned earlier, this pandemic has really led to a huge disruption of life and livelihoods, and particularly for the base of the pyramid. 114 million people who have gone back to their villages, many of them will not come back. But also there is a bigger issue of 120 million people unemployed, 12 million people getting added to it every year, only 10% of the jobs in the formal sector. What do we do with this group of people? Therefore, nano entrepreneurship, which is or self-employment, and micro entrepreneurship has to be a solution for a country. And thankfully, the pandemic has opened, while it has led to challenges, it has opened opportunities in the areas agriculture, tourism, healthcare, alternative energy, and so on and so forth. And travel, for example, travel and tourism, that people have discovered the joys of nature. And India, fortunately, has every nook and corner, has something of interest. And can we think of nature tourism on the base, on the strength of micro entrepreneurship? Is just one example which needs to be pursued. This slide will show that as a social enterprise, Beable has been working for developing micro entrepreneurs. And the model that Beable follows is that it tries to find anchor partnerships who are interested through creating shared value, developing micro entrepreneurship in the rural areas, and together we co-create a business model. And Beable takes the role of mobilization, capability building, both technical and entrepreneurship, mentoring and handholding, often running into a year or so. And some of it is technology enabled. And so that the communities that we work with on the middle of the slide, that we have to work with the community. We have to work with the entrepreneur who's at the heart of it, and work with various partners on products, markets, financing, technology. And thanks to our association with Basics, financial linkages we've been talking about from the beginning. Through the partners, we look at marketing support and process and scale-up support. So this is the model that Beable has been working on. And one of the flagship programs which has been developed by Beable in the last 8 years is in partnership with Essilor, the world's largest eye care company. And we have created vision entrepreneurs, more than 7,000 vision entrepreneurs. But before I talk about it, I would like to show you a small video.
मेरा नाम पीयूष मिश्रा है। मैं बीए तक पढ़ा हूँ। पढ़ाई के बाद मैंने काफ़ी समय तक नौकरी की तलाश की, लेकिन मेरा गांव शहर से दूर होने के कारण यहाँ पर कोई अच्छी जॉब नहीं मिली मुझे। बड़ा बेटा होने के कारण घर की सारी जिम्मेदारियाँ मुझ पर थी और मैं काफ़ी निराश था।
मेरा नाम ममता देवी है। 18 साल की थी, मेरी शादी हो चुकी थी। जब मैं 11वीं कक्षा में पढ़ती थी तो मेरी शादी हो चुकी थी, और जब मैंने 12वीं पास करी तो वो शादी के बाद, और फिर बस मैं अपनी ससुराल आ गई और फिर हम अपनी घर गृहस्थी में लग गए। मेरे पास 3 बेटी हैं। मैं पहले पढ़ना चाहती थी, लेकिन गृहस्थी में पढ़ने की वजह से फिर मैं पढ़ नहीं पाई।
मेरा नाम बिंदे सिंह है और मेरे गांव का नाम पुंडरी कला है। हमारे परिवार में 7 सदस्य हैं, जिनमें 3 भाई 2 बहनें हैं और मम्मी पापा हैं। पहले परिवार की सारी जिम्मेदारी मम्मी पापा पर थे, जो डेली वेजेस मजदूरी करते थे। मैं अपने परिवार के लिए कुछ करना चाहता था। इसके लिए मैंने काफ़ी मेहनत से MA B.Ed किया और B.Ed करने के बाद भी मुझको नौकरी नहीं मिल पाई, जिसकी वजह से मैं काफ़ी निराश रहता था।
फिर मुझे आई मित्रा ट्रेनिंग के बारे में पता चला और मैंने वहाँ एडमिशन ले लिया।
फिर मैं रेगुलर अपना सेंटर पे गई और मैंने इसकी पढ़ाई करी।
और ट्रेनिंग लेने के बाद ऑप्टिशियन शॉप खोली।
और आज मैं एक अच्छा कारोबारी हूँ और अच्छा बिजनेस कर रहा हूँ।
आज मैं एक आई मित्रा हूँ। मेरी खुद की दुकान है, जिससे मेरी अच्छी आमदनी हो जाती है।
जब हमने अपनी शॉप करी तो उससे मुझे बहुत फ़ायदा है। उससे मुझे बहुत ही सम्मान मिला है और बच्चे भी अच्छे से पढ़ पा रहे हैं।
मैं यहीं घर पर रह करके घर की सारी जिम्मेदारियां उठा पा रहा हूँ और अच्छी खासी इनकम है इससे हमारी।
अपनी आमदनी से मैंने एक पक्का मकान बनाया है, जिसमें हमारा पूरा परिवार आराम से रहता है।
You heard the stories of 3 of the vision entrepreneurs out of the 7,000. And in this slide, I'm going to present to you an assessment report of Dalberg, the International Assessment Organization. These 7,000 people have equipped more than 6 million people with glasses. And more than 3 times this number has been impacted by free eye testing, which is a part of the contract with these vision entrepreneurs. And you can see that we have started to, touch the scale that out of about 550 million people in our country who need eye care, we are able to reach out to 20 million. And therefore, there is a need for many more. So there are other aspects of economic impact, the income going up. But the significant thing is the 64% increase in the income of the vision entrepreneurs. It has led to female empowerment. 15% of the vision entrepreneurs are female, and 91% of them, as compared to 26% earlier, are contributing to family income. And the social return on investment is an amazing 48 times as quantified by Dalberg, and it has touched all the 7 SDGs. So these are amazing results of a small project by any standards. And thousands of such initiatives need to be taken forward, in healthcare, in travel, tourism, and fortunately, the pandemic has created the headwinds, the tailwinds for this to happen. And it's possible only if we also develop the innovative financing model. And one of the things talked about was the livelihood impact bonds, which can then bring together the service providers like Beable and impact investors, or maybe if there's enough confidence generated, the mainstream investors, based on the very concrete outcomes, good accountability, good monitoring systems, which the outcome payers can fund. And this is what we require really in all sectors, social sectors, to really develop and create a growth which is a good balance of ecology, economy, and equity. So thank you.
Thank you, Ramolaji. Those were some great points made on effective models on the ground. And I really look forward to these models, all these models we discussed today, being scaled through partnerships, using innovative finance and impact bonds. Now, last but not the least, I would like to request Pramod Bhasin, who is the co-founder of Asha Impact, to come in. Asha Impact is a unique player in the impact investing space, since it is also a policy advocacy platform. And Pramod is a signatory to Living My Promise Pledge, a platform where professionals have committed to give away 50% of their wealth. He has also been featured recently in June by Forbes Asia's Philanthropy Heroes list. So Pramod, I welcome you, and I know livelihoods is a sector very close to your heart. You're also on the board of the upcoming Skills University in India. So if you can share some insights from your experience, more importantly on what's not worked in this ecosystem, and if you could touch upon the scope of social finance instruments.
Thank you very much, Priyanka. I really appreciate it. And wonderful listening to all the other panelists here. It's so exciting to see all the things that people are doing. And for Mr. Ramola, who I know well from many years, certainly, we must come and talk to you about our investment bonds, our social investment bonds that we are looking at through Asha Impact, and see what we can do with some of these micro entrepreneurs. I think Aparna may be listening in, and perhaps we can pick that up as we go forward with you. Sushilji, it's a pleasure to reconnect with you on that. I wanted to touch base on a couple of thoughts. One is on livelihoods and skilling and social finance. How can we make that happen? How can we make that work? And I think my view on that has been for a while now, that the basis on which there is a lot of, let me back up, there is a lot of demand for impact bonds. There's a lot of demand for businesses to receive money, which is perhaps at a lower interest rates, to be able to do that in a manner that is efficient. And yet today, the mechanisms to do all of those are very complex. Unlike a normal bond where the rules are written out very well, I think the time it takes to actually pull these structures together to create the types of impact that we need in the time frame that is necessary is still perhaps taking too long. I hope and feel that over time, these will be reduced significantly. The outcomes that we see are be defined better. The monitoring mechanisms need to be defined better, and we can pull together really well to make it a very attractive position for many investors to come in. We do believe that the demand for this is very significant. The amount of money available in the world for this kind of effort is very, very large. You have the situation today where on one side CSR funds are looking for places to invest, and the other side you have so many others who are looking for CSR funds, and the matching is imperfect. And I hope in time we can really make that work extremely well. The subject that I'd love to talk about with trepidation, since we have Dr. Manish Kumar here, as well as Sushil and others who know this area very well, much better than I do. I had the privilege of starting Skills Academy and losing a lot of money. So I speak both with a lens of a really bad, of running a really bad skills company as well, but as well as from the perspective of what I think are some of the real issues that haven't been yet addressed within the skills framework. And let me touch upon a few of those. Firstly, skills and skills development needs to be aspirational. If you look at the countries that do this the best, Germany, Brazil, Singapore, many others, skills is aspirational. Korea, when you bring in skills and you make them aspirational, then you create a pull for people to come in and take on skills courses, which they believe will ultimately get them a better career and a better job. And also a better standing in society and in their environment. As a result, one of the experiments we are taking on, we don't know how well it will do, but I am very confident that it will do pretty well, is building out the Skills University in Delhi. We started working with the AAP government on that. We've provided through Asha, and Aparna is working on that herself through Asha Impact. And we are actually looking forward to building out this university with the principal aim of achieving a few things. One is, can we make sure that we, by giving a university degree to skills to people who come in for that training, it puts it on a different pedestal. It makes it aspirational. They feel that they are achieving something different. And they feel also that it's aspirational to go to the kind of campuses that people really believe will provide them great education. 2, an intense focus on quality. Our problem has been, in my view, that quality is very, I guess I would say, is very variable. And therefore, the quality of training, the quality of teaching, everything else becomes really more variable than it should be. And it is hard, of course, to control that when it is being delivered across so many distributed branches, so many distributed training providers, so many different parts of the country, all of which is necessary, all of which is important that we have places to deliver these to people across the country. And yet at the same time, it's very, very important that the quality is maintained, because unless the quality is maintained, the jobs and businesses don't give them adequate jobs or adequate premiums for the fact that they have got certified, that they are in a position where they are able to command a premium on their salary. I think those things are very important to create a demand for skills and for skills training to make it successful. Third, I think the entire investment, the placement process has to be done really well. There is a large education that needs to be done of industry. I have been constantly disappointed, being an industrialist myself, at the fact that industry is not paying enough attention to this. They are not paying the premiums that people should deserve to get when they're certified. They're not looking after employees as well as they should and giving them the tenure of jobs that they need to be done. So making that match is very important, and making that match in a very concerted, curated way, where we get together with industries who are really serious and recognize the benefits of productivity that you get from that, become a very, very important steps as you go forward. And lastly, we have to educate and train people probably for longer. At the end, the problem is that we are trying to, with skills training today, maybe of 8 weeks or 12 weeks or 14 weeks, overcome what is potentially many, many years of not very good schooling. For that, we need to perhaps spend more time. We need to have more depth. We need to understand it better, the curriculum in terms of what is required. We need greater partnerships with industry. We need apprenticeship programs to work. And we're trying to do that within the umbrella of a skills university, which I hope many other states will also pick up and use that to build this very curated, very well networked, very well connected opportunity for the youth in many of our states. In fact, the Delhi government did come out with a placement platform and saw an enormous mass of jobs. People apply for enormous mass of jobs. Now, how many of those connections were made, et cetera, remains to be seen. But that is the kind of effort which I think is required to re-engineer the skillings landscape. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you so much. Great learnings there. And I particularly liked your focus on linking up the demand side, which is the industry, very effectively with the supply side from a long gestational perspective. And with that, to round up our final thoughts, we have invited Professor Jasjeet Singh as our guest speaker. Jasjeet has studied various models across the globe in innovative finance. So Professor, if you could share with us your reflections on strategies to keep in mind so that impact is the cornerstone while we structure these.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to get a chance to be with these esteemed panelists. I'm really inspired learning about all the work that you've been doing. And as a business school professor at INSEAD here in Singapore, I'm bringing a little bit of the outside perspective of the conversations, specifically on innovative finance, as well as talking about it from a global lens as well as from an academic perspective, because in a way, innovative finance is being presented as an alternative to the traditional grant-based models and so on. And there are some people who feel very excited about it, while it also has its critics. And as always, the reality is somewhere in between, which is it's a great tool to use in a lot of settings. It can't cure everything, but it is something that is looking promising on a number of dimensions. So I want to share a few thoughts related to that. Next slide, please. So here's a picture from social finance on the impact bonds worldwide. And the important thing that I want to highlight in this picture is if you think of the total amount of money that has gone into impact bonds globally, it's actually relatively small. It's less than 1% of the impact investing space overall. And we know impact investing space itself is a small fraction of the overall financial sector. So in some sense, it's early days. It's still evolving. It has high potential, but the excitement in a way is, I think, far ahead of the reality is. And I want to point out a few things which highlight its potential, but also on things that still need to be worked out, which is why I think the space is small. The other thing I want to emphasize is that when we talk about impact bonds, we are talking specifically about pay for performance. And very often this term gets confused with just a general term, social bonds, or a general term, green bonds, which very often might still be loans for projects with a societal objective, but they are not pay for performance. I think that's an important distinction to bear in mind. And depending on the nature of the project, this might or might not be appropriate. Next slide, please. So one of the things that's relatively unambiguous and uncontroversial about impact bonds is that it really drives a performance-driven culture. And this is a quote from Safina Hussain from Educate Girls, who implemented this impact bond in Rajasthan over 3 years. And one of the big benefits for her, more than the money per se, was the fact that it changed the DNA of Educate Girls to focus much more on what was being delivered. And in particular, because the payments were triggered by how many of the girls that were not in school were now coming to school, and what was happening to school performance of the children, that focus became much more sharpened, right? So that's one big benefit that comes out of impact bonds like this, in addition to just the access to funding. Next slide, please. But the other thing to bear in mind is that once one goes down this path of pay by performance, one has to get very, very serious about managing impact. What's your strategy for impact? How are you going to measure it? How are you going to demonstrate it? And very importantly, right in the beginning, what are the terms that you're agreeing to on what would trigger payments to somebody who's executing a project? And example that highlights how critical this is well documented in this documentary that came out on impact bonds, which is called The Invisible Heart. And the challenge was that there was an impact bond in the state of Utah, which was one of the outcome funders was, one of the investors was Goldman Sachs. And they were supposed to be paid based on certain performance metrics. And it did seem like the metrics were met. But there was a lot of controversy in this bond later about A, the metrics were not appropriate, and B, the evaluation process itself was not rigorous enough, so that it was in a way too easy for those metrics to be met. So Goldman, yes, it looked like the bond was successful. Yes, Goldman Sachs got paid, but from the point of view of a lot of people in the ecosystem, they got paid unfairly, right? Which highlights that if you're really going down this path, you really have to have much more clarity on the notion of impact and be able to establish that the impact is being realized. Next slide, please. So, just on the pros and cons a little bit on the impact bonds. So certainly there's a few things that have been noted. They facilitate transparency, they facilitate accountability, they bring effectiveness by focusing on outcomes. And they're bringing a new pool of money when the government is budget constrained. They can potentially bring in private sources of funds to scale impact. And overall, there's the additional benefit that there's a cumulative body of evidence accumulating on what works and what doesn't. But there's a few challenges to bear in mind. And for anybody going into this space, this has to be recognized. And this is something that needs to be addressed in the way you set up your impact bond, which is normally there's very high complexity and transaction cost to these things. It can take more than a year. And the cost in the case of Educate Girls Bond, just the cost of administration around this was about 3 times the cost of the program itself, right? It's definitely very tricky when impact cannot be measured precisely and unambiguously. There's a risk that this can become an excuse for privatization and shirking by government on what should normally be democratic responsibilities rather than handed over to somebody in the private sector. And there's always a risk of private investors who are not mission aligned. And if they really are focused just on the money part, that they might capture a disproportionate value. And finally, if the selling proposition is just making money, it's natural that the projects that are riskier, even if they're potentially innovative, might have trouble getting funding. So these are a few things to bear in mind. And let me just briefly talk about the next slide. I just want to point out that impact bonds are just one of the instruments. There's another instrument that has recently been experimented with, which is the career impact bonds. And here the idea is it's a livelihoods tool as well in the context of US, thinking about relatively low income people who might not have the money or even access to finance to be able to go to college. And they might not even have the money to be able to take a vocational training course. And the idea here is, how about having some sort of a impact bond where the deal this time is the focus is still on outcomes, but the person paying back would be the beneficiary or the participant herself. And the idea in this case would be, just to give an example, imagine that you're confident you have an excellent training course available through a private provider. It costs $15,000. This participant would not pay herself. She'll go through the course. Somebody else will pick up. So this will be a pool of money. It's like impact investing, but impact first. And then she repays, let's say over the next 4 years, a certain fraction of her monthly income. But importantly, no payments would be required of her if she's not able to meet a minimum threshold of income. So this is an alternative, just to illustrate the point that impact bonds, traditional social impact bonds, are just one of the tools. There are many different ways of exploring how you could come up with creative ways of having an impact through finance. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jasjeet, for your insightful comments. You have shared some great models and very sharp learnings. We will now open the floor for Q&A session. So please post your questions, continue to post your questions. And as I browse through these questions, I will loop back to our panelists. My first question is for Dr. Manish by Yuichi Nishihara. Dr. Manish, the point is that Yuichi is very strongly inspired by what's happening in India and at the same time shocked to know the tough situation in India. So is the ratio between formal to informal workforce improving? And ideally, how fast should the ratio improve? And more importantly, what is required to improve and achieve this?
So this is a complex issue, and let me just try to maybe put some facts in perspective. One is, if you look at India's population, we are 1.3 billion people, and that's equivalent to the population of the entire African continent, 40 countries. So that's the nature of the problem, firstly. Secondly, well, we have over time, I think if you look at the per capita income of India, it's already multiplied by about 6-7 times, and yet it is insufficient. I cited some figures when I was speaking that clearly indicates that we are not really where we should be in the way we would have liked it. But then I think the challenge is, if we use regulatory mechanism to ensure that people are paid higher, there would be adverse impact on the business, which essentially implies that if the business goes down, then there is a kind of cyclical effect which will occur. So in some sense, the government finds itself in a very peculiar position that is very keen to ensure that formalization of economy occurs. And you'll see a slew of measures which has been taken by the current government, which includes GST, which includes demonetization, which includes more of digital approach to how payments are made. All of them aiming for formalization, and formalization is increasing compared to where it was, excuse me. But I think the pace at which it's increasing, we need to do far much more. One of the ways which could really help, and that's something on which government is working quite hard, is having more of apprenticeship along with skill development. So not only do you create skills, but follow the dual model of Germany, where you ensure that people who get skilled also becomes apprentices in some of the agencies, and then a kind of formalization sets in, because that's right from the start, you are getting a little more formalized in the manner you get integrated to the industry or to the service sector. So yes, I mean, it's a difficult scenario, but improving over time. The magnitude of problem is high, but we are hopeful that we'll be there. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much for really answering that articulately. I think for my next question, I'll request Geeta. This is a question on dilemma of tech leverage. Given that we will be leaning into tech platforms, especially post-COVID, how do we straddle this with trainings in the rural areas where the infrastructure platforms may be rather weak?
This is, I guess, an issue that we do need to solve. I mean, not just for skilling and employment, but also for education and many other, financial inclusion, many other things that are now becoming just much more easier to do digitally. I would say, significant efforts again are being put by the government to ensure connectivity in the rural areas, data packs, the CSCs or the community service centers where data can be available. And definitely post-COVID, I would say many working groups of government as well as multilaterals like UNICEF, etc., have been set up to try and address this issue. It will come in slowly. I mean, there's no magic bullet for it. I would say as we go about our work on, digital job mapping, digital skilling, one always needs to be aware of the digital divide and try and find some offline solutions for it. And some of these like job portals, etc., are also, I mean, we're trying to make them work on feature phones. So I would say consciously being aware of part of the population that may not be connected, and also assuming that with a lot of these task forces, there will be increased connectivity over the next year or so.
Okay, thank you, Geeta, for that thought. My next question is for Pramod Bhasin. Pramod, you had made a point around the role of industry and how the industry needs to take more ownership in this space. So, and the quality of training. So how can we really channelize and leverage that expertise of that sector to come into livelihood space? So any thoughts on that?
Sure. I think there are two things I would say. One is on quality is we need to significantly enhance the use of technology in skills training. Right now, it is still very much manual or teacher-led and with curriculum-led that way, etc. Now, in all the cases where you're teaching people who don't have access to broadband, don't have access to computers, iPads, all of those kind of things, we understand. But even in those cases, I think arming teachers with technology to make sure that the quality, etc., is maintained really well, and to be able to monitor training, etc., is a very important element. Now, there's been lots done in that, but I really believe there's miles to go before we do that. If you look at NASSCOM's future skills courses and see our type of audience they have received, it's fantastic. How many people have got onto those courses? And that's what happens when a course is really good, quality is really high, and the material is well displayed and well done. It really is an eye-opener. The second part, I would say, on industry, I think one thing I would have requested the government to do, I don't know if they can, is to actually incentivize or de-incentivize industry if they don't hire people with certification in some ways. Or ask for industry to pay a small premium, not a lot, a small premium for people with certification versus people without. Because that will start telling industry and telling the world that skills training is aspirational and worth doing. Because right now, too many of industries say, I can hire someone with a certification, but I can also hire someone without the certification and train them myself. And that actually defeats the purpose. And we've got to create more awareness to be able to do that differently.
Great. Thanks so much, Pramod, for that. For the next question, I think I'm going to request Professor Jasjeet, because this is on partnerships. I know, Professor, that you have done some work on building global platforms for social impact. So the question is, how can barriers to creating partnerships be overcome? Your thoughts on that?
I think I would say it's very important to make sure you're creating partnerships with the right kind of people. And very often this gets divided into, hey, partnering with for-profits or non-profits and so on. But I would say ultimately it's much more about being very clear on being mission aligned. And there are certainly for-profit organizations and funders out there that really care about impact, and there might be non-profits which are not that effective. So I would say look for mission alignment, look for genuine intentionality, but very importantly, especially once you start going into complex territory like impact bonds, also clarify mutual expectations so that there's no misunderstanding there. And in the end, of course, what also helps in these spaces is personal trust built over months and years, certainly, because there's nothing better to get to know the intentionality of individuals than getting to know them well. So those are some things that come to mind.
Okay, thank you, Professor Jasjeet. My next question is for Alkesh. Alkesh, given the inspiring work that BMGF does in the space of empowering women through leveraging self-help groups, what has your experience been in sense of measuring the impact, and what has the experience been generally on the field through qualitative or quantitative studies, if done?
Yeah. So we've done a lot of large-scale impact studies in different areas. I didn't speak about our health and nutrition work, where we layer on health and nutrition work, and the results there have been pretty encouraging in large populations covering, for example, in Bihar, more than 10 million women. And we find that many indicators increase: those who deliver in hospitals for their babies, breastfeeding rates, etc., etc. On the livelihood side, we found two main things, which is a study we did for NRLM. The first is that about 12 to 13% of women did benefit from livelihoods from this program, which translates to about 12 to 13 million women having got livelihood benefits. And that's why the goal in the next 5 years is to take it from 12% to 50%. And the second big finding we found is that, and again, it comes back to what I'm saying, is that, if you just leave rural women and say, we'll skill you and you can get a job, it's not going to work. You need a lot of support more than that. So what the SRLM, the State Rural Livelihood Missions, have done is federated these SHGs into what's called village organization and cluster level federations. So what we found is when these cluster level federations are strong, and there's a definition of strong and active and so on, the SHGs do much better, get much better jobs, earn much better, health and laboring is much better, etc., etc. So we now know that you really need to provide this support of strong cluster level federations. So I would say evaluation is really the crux of how we work, and it's based on that we decide what to do next.
Great. Thank you, Alkesh. And in interest of time, we will now have to close our Q&A round. Thanks to our panelists for sharing such wonderful insights and emerging perspectives. Clearly, industry participation, last mile entrepreneurship, skilling opportunities have come out as emerging themes, apart from leveraging technology platforms. And big thanks to our participants for their interests and thoughtful questions. And now I hand it over to Kavita. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for participating in this interesting session. Thank you very much Geeta, Priyaka, Dr. Manish Kumar, Sushil, Alkesh, Pramod and Jasjeet. Your insights made this an impactful session. We will be posting the recording of this session on our website by the next week, so please look out for it. Thank you everyone for joining.